All right, what then worry? Well, not investors. A corner wall and broad still buying up stocks. The Dow closing in on a record. NASDAQ and S&P ensconced in record territory here. So not concerned by a legislative calendar that could delay, if not deny, some of the things that these guys really want to see, like a more cost-effective health care law and those tax cuts. They're waiting. It's really about 31 legislative days until the end of this fiscal and calendar congressional year. The AP Congressional Reporter Erica Werner, Smart Trade Pro Founder D.R. Barton, Shaffer Asset Management CEO Dan Shaffer, and Rasmussen Reports political analyst Amy Holmes. So, Amy, if the agenda is looking dicey or at least getting truncated, spell out how Republicans pick through what they can do and what they can't do.
Well, I think they still try to get tax cuts, if not comprehensive tax reform. And, Neil, I was always a little skeptical, actually, about what I considered the irrational exuberance, to borrow a phrase from Alan Greenspan, by the stock market at the election of Mr. Trump and having a Republican-controlled Congress, because just the legislative process would tell you, with only 52 Republicans in the Senate, that was going to slow things down. They're going to need to pull some Democrats onto this legislation. Obamacare, that was always going to be a tough sell in the United States Senate to, be repealing or reforming Obama's legacies. So I think the stock market did get a little ahead of itself. Dan, maybe it's not about any of that. What do you think's going on?
Well, Neil, as you know, it's good to see you again. It's just a lot of what I consider money manipulation that the public just is not aware of. If you look at some of the price of these stocks and the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve and the money that's been put in, we've been talking about this for over 5 years, but yet this game continues to go on.
What's the game? What's the manipulation?
Well, the game is that the money free flow is going into the system, and we don't know exactly where it's going. That's one of the issues. But the Federal Reserve has this huge balance sheet where they've pumped money into the banks, and the money's being lent out to whoever is pushing up these stocks. A lot of companies are buying back their own stocks at very low cost. And this is, we've seen this in the 1920s. We've seen it at different periods of history.
Well, I know what happened after that. Are you saying we're in for a crash?
Well, I think we are. I really think that if you look at the velocity of money, and again, I don't want to get too technical, but the velocity of money has collapsed to below 1960 levels, which means money's really not exchanging hands. It's sitting in hard assets, not just the stock market, Neil. It's in the art market, it's in the housing market. So you got all these bubbles all over the place, and it's just a matter of time before everybody turns around and says there's no more buyers left, and we get that big sell-off. I think the company's earnings are not going to keep up with the company's stocks. That's my opinion.
All right. Well,
I think Trump's going to have some difficulty, too.
DR, one of the things we have seen is that despite all of those worries and concerns, the earnings have been robust. Maybe even with those robust earnings and better than expected numbers coming out of much of corporate America, it doesn't justify a market that's at these levels. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think we are justifying where we are right now, Neil, in that every time something happens in the White House or on Congressional Hill, the markets take a little teeny pullback and then they just trundle right on ahead. You're right. Corporate earnings are the best year-over-year growth since 2010. We're hearing good news out of Europe, 9 straight quarters of increasing manufacturing numbers. So there are some things supporting this. And just one last point, markets really don't die from all-time highs where we have good breadth, where lots of stocks are participating. We could have some, go down from here over months, but not in the short term. In the short term, we're seeing continued strength that should carry us through the summer.
Well, we'll see. But, Erica, you follow Congress closely, but, I do think that'll baked into a lot of this expectation that we're going to see tax rates go down. They might not be effective this year. They might be effective next year at the rate these guys are going, but they're still going to get them. What are you hearing on that front, and whether if they get stymied in this health care thing, they move on to the tax cuts? Can they do that? What happens?
Well, frankly, Neil, I'm not sure why anything that's going on Capitol Hill right now would give Wall Street or really anyone else cause for much optimism. They're stuck on health care. As you know, they're on recess right now. Come back next week. Then just 7 weeks left until the long August recess. If they can't finish up health care in the Senate, at a certain point they have to fish or cut bait, because if they don't dispense with
why aren't they cutting bait now? Because I've heard the way Mitch McConnell is talking, it's going to be a Herculean task, this healthcare thing. So why don't you junk it now?
Well, I mean, they ran on it for 7 years. It's all they talked about. So, I mean, to say junk it, I think they want to put a little more effort into it before they make that call and maybe even take some votes to,
yeah, and they do need the revenue or whatever from that, I guess. But let me ask you about that, Amy. Let's say it does fall through. I don't mean to be cynical or jaded here. Is it your sense, or the people you're talking to, that they're not worried about markets, they're not worried about falling because they think the underlying economy is good? The expectations, we're going to have a very strong second quarter. Earnings are coming in okay. That will keep this going, tax cut or no, even if it's delayed.
Well, one can hope so, and certainly Donald Trump has been cutting regulations that have been very helpful to the economy, particularly at the EPA when it comes to carbon emissions, et cetera. But I think the big question for Republicans on Capitol Hill is whether or not their tax cuts need to be revenue neutral, and they're having the debate around that. I know from Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform, that he is advocating that it shouldn't have to stick to revenue neutrality, which means they could move on from Obamacare and start implementing some tax cuts.
I don't know. It's a roll of the dice. Guys, I want to thank you all on this very busy breaking news day.